The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was folding laundry. An unknown number flashed across my screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello, is this Mrs. Vanessa Torres?" A calm female voice asked. I confirmed, my hands still gripping one of my husband's shirts. "I'm calling from St. Augustine Medical Center. Your husband, Mr. Blake Torres, is here at the maternity ward. His partner is in active labor, and we need to verify some insurance information." The world stopped spinning. The shirt fell from my hands. My ears rang with a high-pitched tone that drowned out whatever the nurse said next. Partner. Labor. Maternity ward. My husband had kissed me goodbye 3 hours ago, saying he had meetings all day. My brain couldn't process the words I'd just heard. "Mrs. Torres? Are you still there?" I was already grabbing my keys, my purse, my phone. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip the doorknob. "Which hospital?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding distant and strange. She repeated the address. I was out the door before she finished speaking. The 15-minute drive to St. Augustine felt like falling through ice. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. Every stoplight felt like torture. My mind raced with impossible explanations, desperate justifications that made no sense even as I conjured them. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was another Blake Torres. Maybe this was some cruel prank. But I knew. Deep in my gut, beneath the shock and denial, I knew. I parked crookedly across 2 spaces and ran toward the entrance. The maternity ward was on the 3rd floor. I didn't wait for the elevator. The stairwell echoed with my footsteps and ragged breathing. When I burst through the doors, I saw him immediately. Blake stood outside room 304, holding a bouquet of pink roses. The same flowers he'd brought me on our first anniversary. He was pacing, checking his phone, looking anxious and excited. Then he saw me. His face went completely white. The flowers dropped from his hand, petals scattering across the sterile floor. We stared at each other across the hallway. A nurse walked past him, smiling. "Won't be long now, Dad," she said cheerfully. I stood frozen in that hospital corridor, my entire life reshaping itself around this single moment. My name was Vanessa Torres. I was 32 years old. I'd been married to Blake for 7 years. We'd met at a friend's wedding, danced until midnight, and fallen in love with embarrassing speed. He proposed on a beach at sunset. We bought a house with a backyard perfect for the children we planned to have someday. Just yesterday morning, he'd kissed my forehead while I made coffee. He'd told me he loved me. He'd reminded me to pick up his dry cleaning. He'd lived a completely normal day in our completely normal marriage while somewhere across town, another woman carried his child. A child so close to being born that he was here, in a hospital, holding flowers, waiting to become a father. To someone else's baby. My legs felt weak. I walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate. He raised his hands slightly, palms out, like I was a dangerous animal he needed to calm. When I stood directly in front of him, close enough to smell his cologne, I asked the only question that mattered. "How long has she been pregnant?" Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His eyes darted around the hallway, checking who might be watching, who might hear. Always worried about appearances. Always concerned about his reputation. "Vanessa, please, just," he started, his voice low and urgent. "How long?" I repeated, louder this time. He flinched. "It's not what you think. It wasn't serious. It just happened." The words were so pathetically predictable I almost laughed. Behind him, from inside room 304, a woman screamed. Not a scream of fear, but of pain. Deep, primal, the sound of labor. Blake's head turned instinctively toward the door. His face showed concern, tenderness even. For her. For them. My stomach twisted violently. "I was going to tell you," he whispered, turning back to me. "After the baby came. I was planning to explain everything. We could have worked through this together." Another scream pierced the air. Blake shifted his weight, torn between me and the door. Between his wife and his mistress. Between his old life and his new one. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Please don't make a scene," he begged, his voice breaking. "Not here. Not now." I stared at him for one more second, memorizing his face. The face I'd woken up next to for 7 years. The face that had lied to me every single day for 9 months. Maybe longer. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't slap him or cause the scene he feared. I simply turned and walked away. My footsteps were steady and measured. I didn't look back. I took the elevator down this time, standing perfectly still among strangers heading to visit their loved ones. Normal people having normal days. I made it to my car before the shock wore off. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, and for exactly 60 seconds, I broke. Sobs tore through me so violently my whole body shook. Tears blurred my vision. My chest ached like something physical had been ripped from it. Then I stopped. I wiped my eyes. I started the engine. The crying could wait. Right now, I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to protect myself from whatever was coming next. Because Blake would come home eventually. He'd have explanations, excuses, justifications. And I needed to be ready. I didn't drive home. Instead, I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot 3 blocks from the hospital. My hands were still shaking as I searched my phone for family law attorneys in the area. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for protection. For clarity. For someone who could tell me what rights I had and what steps I needed to take. I called the first office with good reviews. A receptionist answered, professional and kind. "I need to speak to a lawyer," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "My husband I just found out he's having a baby with another woman." She put me through immediately. The attorney's name was Brenda Castellano. Her voice was calm and direct. We scheduled an emergency consultation for later that afternoon. "Bring any financial documents you have access to," she advised. "Bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies. Everything." After hanging up, I sat in my car and stared at nothing. The normal world continued around me. People ordered coffee. Cars pulled in and out of parking spaces. Life moved forward. "You need to prepare for what he will try next," Brenda had said before we hung up. Those words echoed in my mind as I finally drove home to an empty house that suddenly felt like enemy territory. I spent the rest of the day creating a file. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I pulled bank statements from our joint account, noticing for the first time how many transactions I'd stopped paying attention to. We'd always trusted each other with money. I'd never had reason to question charges or withdrawals. Now I looked at everything with new eyes. I found our tax returns from the past 3 years. Our mortgage documents. Insurance policies where we were each other's beneficiaries. Our car titles. I photographed everything with my phone, uploaded copies to a secure cloud account Blake didn't know about. Then I started a timeline. When had he started acting differently? Had there been signs I'd missed? I remembered him taking more work trips over the past year. Coming home later. Being on his phone constantly. I'd attributed it to stress at his job. Now every memory rearranged itself into a darker pattern. Around 6 p.m., I discovered something that made my blood run cold. 3 large withdrawals from our savings account. $5,000 each. Taken over the past 5 months. $15,000 I'd never noticed missing. What had he spent it on? Her? The baby? An apartment for his secret family? 2 days passed before Blake came home. I'd been existing in a strange state of numbness, going through motions, sleeping in short bursts, eating because my body demanded it. When his key turned in the lock Thursday evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched. He walked in looking exhausted. His eyes were red-rimmed. He set down his overnight bag and just stood there. "Vanessa," he started. I said nothing. "We need to talk about this," he continued, moving closer. "I know you're upset. I know this is complicated. But we can work through it if you'll just listen." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi. My name is Brooke. I'm a friend of Amber's. I think we should talk. She doesn't know about you. I stared at the message. Amber. The woman giving birth to my husband's child had a name. And apparently, she didn't know Blake was married. My stomach lurched. I looked up at Blake, who was watching me anxiously. Who's Amber? I asked quietly. His face went pale again. That seemed to be his default expression lately. How do you know that name? Answer the question. He sank into a chair across from me. The baby's mother. Her name is Amber. I texted Brooke back, ignoring Blake's stammered explanations. We arranged to meet for coffee the next morning. Blake talked for over an hour that night, his words washing over me like meaningless noise. He claimed he'd met Amber at a conference. That it was supposed to be a one-time thing. That when she told him she was pregnant, he panicked. That he'd been trying to figure out how to tell me. I listened without interrupting, cataloging every lie, every contradiction. The next morning, I met Brooke at a quiet cafe downtown. She was younger than me, maybe 25, with kind eyes and obvious discomfort about this whole situation. Amber thinks Blake is divorced, she told me after we'd ordered coffee. She thinks you two separated 2 years ago. He told her the divorce was almost finalized. The betrayal cut deeper. He hadn't just cheated. He'd built an entire false narrative. 2 separate lives. 2 separate realities. She's a good person, Brooke continued. She wouldn't have gotten involved with a married man. She's devastated right now. The baby came, and Blake's been weird, distant. She's starting to realize something's wrong. I realized then that Amber was a victim too. Blake had lied to both of us. Used both of us. Manipulated both of us. When I got home from meeting Brooke, Blake's car was in the driveway. I told him I needed space, that he should stay with a friend. Apparently, he'd decided to ignore that request. I found him in the living room, looking almost relaxed. Like this was just a rough patch we'd navigate together. Hey, he said when I walked in. I picked up dinner. Thai food, your favorite. Thought we could talk. I set my purse down slowly. You told her we were divorced. He had the decency to look ashamed. Vanessa, I was trying to protect everyone. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. How did that work out? He ignored my tone. Look, I know this is messy. I know I screwed up. But we can figure this out. We're married. We have history. We have a house together. We can move through this. I stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time in years. This stranger wearing my husband's face. The baby, he continued carefully, I'll need to be part of his life. Obviously. But that doesn't change us. I was thinking maybe I could bring him here sometimes. You'd get to know him. It could work. My jaw actually dropped. He thought I would help raise his affair baby. He actually believed that was a reasonable suggestion. The next day, I met with a financial advisor Brenda had recommended. Her name was Teresa Kim, and she specialized in untangling assets during separations. I gave her access to our financial records. What she discovered made my hands shake. Blake had opened a separate bank account 14 months ago. He'd been funneling money there systematically, in amounts small enough that I wouldn't notice from our joint account. He'd also rented an apartment across town. A 1-bedroom place in a complex called Riverside Gardens. The lease was in his name only. He'd been furnishing it, paying utilities, creating a complete second household. For Amber. For their baby. For the life he was building while pretending ours was fine. This shows premeditation, Teresa said, her voice professional but sympathetic. He wasn't just having an affair. He was planning a separate life. She pulled up more documents. He's been making regular payments to a furniture store. Baby supplies. A crib. A changing table. He's been preparing for months. I felt sick. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every moment of distance between us had been him building toward this. And he'd wanted me to stay. To keep our house, our shared account, our marriage intact while he lived his real life somewhere else. Blake started trying to manage me. That's the only way I could describe it. He'd come home from work and attempt to shift the narrative, to make this somehow my fault. "You've been distant lately," he said one evening while I made dinner in mechanical silence. "For months, actually. Maybe if we'd been more connected, this wouldn't have happened." I stirred the pasta, saying nothing. "I'm not trying to blame you," he continued, though that's exactly what he was doing. "I'm just saying relationships take two people. We've both been neglecting each other." Another night, "You never wanted to try new things. You got comfortable. Settled. A man needs excitement, passion." I listened to every word. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I let him talk himself into deeper holes, revealing his true character with every self-serving excuse. I didn't record these conversations. I didn't need to. I remembered every word. Every justification. Every attempt to twist reality into a shape that absolved him. He thought my silence meant weakness. He thought I was processing, maybe even accepting his version of events. He had no idea I was 3 steps ahead, building a case, protecting myself, preparing for what came next. On Monday, I received a Facebook message from Amber. My heart raced as I opened it. "Hi Vanessa. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. Brooke told me what's really going on. I had no idea Blake was married. I swear I didn't know." Her message was long, apologetic, devastated. She explained that she'd met Blake at a medical conference where she worked registration. He'd told her he was recently divorced, that he was lonely, that his ex-wife had broken his heart. They'd dated for 4 months before she got pregnant. He'd seemed supportive at first, excited even. But as the pregnancy progressed, he'd become distant, unavailable. He said work was busy, Amber wrote. He said he was stressed. I thought he was scared of being a dad. I never imagined he was living a completely different life. She sent screenshots of their text conversations. Messages where Blake called me unstable and emotionally abusive. Messages claiming I'd disappeared most weekends to my sister's house because I couldn't handle being around him. None of it was true. I barely saw my sister. I was home every weekend. He'd created an entire fictional version of me to justify his betrayal. The screenshots also showed his promises. "Once the baby comes, we'll be a real family," he'd written. "Just the 3 of us. I'm leaving her. I'm just waiting for the right time." Those screenshots changed everything. They proved Blake had been planning to leave me. That Amber wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. This had been deliberate. Calculated. He'd been building an exit strategy while keeping me in place as a safety net. I sent the screenshots to Brenda. She called me within an hour. "This is crucial evidence," she said. "It demonstrates planning and intent to abandon the marriage. Combined with the financial documents showing his separate accounts and apartment, we have a very strong case." Over the next week, I moved carefully and quietly. I opened my own bank account at a different bank. I transferred half our savings there, which was completely legal since it was a joint account. I contacted our insurance companies and updated beneficiary information on my policies. I changed the passwords on all my personal accounts. I removed my name from his credit cards. I consulted with Brenda about the house. Since I'd contributed the down payment from my inheritance before we married, we had options. Everything I did was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was strategic. Blake noticed nothing. He came home each evening, ate the dinners I made, watched television, and slept beside me as if everything was normal. As if his son wasn't across town with another woman. As if his entire life wasn't a lie. 10 days after the hospital confrontation, I scheduled a meeting with Brenda to finalize my plan. I didn't tell Blake where I was going. I took a personal day from my job at the medical billing company where I worked as a supervisor. Brenda's office was downtown, in a professional building with glass walls and modern furniture. She had all my documents organized in a folder. "We're ready when you are," she said, laying out my options. I could file for separation immediately. Based on Blake's financial misconduct, his separate household, and his documented plans to abandon the marriage, I was in a very strong position. The house would likely be mine, given my inheritance contribution and his obvious intent to leave. His separate accounts could be considered dissipation of marital assets. His child support obligations to Amber would be factored into any alimony discussions. "I'm ready," I told Brenda. She nodded and pulled out the paperwork. We spent 3 hours going through everything, making sure every detail was correct. By the time I left her office, the separation papers were complete, ready to be served. I drove home through afternoon traffic, feeling strangely calm. Tonight, I would confront Blake with everything I knew. Tonight, the pretending would end. I waited until after dinner. We sat at the dining room table where we'd shared hundreds of meals, celebrated anniversaries, discussed dreams. Blake was scrolling through his phone, probably texting Amber. I placed a manila folder on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, barely looking up. "Open it." Something in my tone made him set down his phone. He opened the folder and started reading. His face went through several colors as he flipped through pages. Bank statements showing his secret account. The lease agreement for the Riverside Gardens apartment. Furniture receipts. Baby supply purchases. Screenshots of his messages to Amber where he called me unstable and abusive. A timeline documenting his entire affair. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing. "Vanessa, I can explain." "I don't want explanations," I interrupted calmly. "I want you to leave." "This is my house too," he said, his voice rising defensively. "Actually, I provided the entire down payment from my inheritance. Brenda thinks I have a strong case for keeping it." I stood up. "Pack a bag. Go to your apartment. The one you've been paying for. Or go to Amber. I don't care. But you're not staying here tonight." His face transformed from shock to anger. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." Blake stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His shock had morphed into rage, the kind of anger that comes when someone realizes they've lost control. "You went through my private accounts?" he shouted. "You invaded my privacy? That's illegal." I remained seated, calm. "Actually, it's not. The bank statements from our joint account are equally mine. Your messages to Amber were provided by her willingly. The apartment lease is public record. Everything in that folder was obtained legally." "This is insane," he continued, pacing now. "You're overreacting. You're going to ruin everything I've built. My relationship with my son, my new family, your new family." I interrupted quietly. "What about this family? The one you made vows to?" He laughed bitterly. "You don't understand. Amber needs me. The baby needs me. I have responsibilities now." "You had responsibilities here." He spun to face me. "You're being dramatic. Vindictive. You're trying to punish me instead of accepting that relationships change, that people grow apart." I pulled another envelope from the folder and slid it across the table. "What's that?" he demanded. "Open it." He grabbed the envelope and tore it open. Inside were separation papers, professionally drafted by Brenda, outlining terms that heavily favored me based on his financial misconduct and abandonment of the marriage. Blake's hands shook as he read the separation agreement. The terms were clear. I would retain the house, given my inheritance contribution and his obvious intent to establish a separate residence. Our joint assets would be divided, with consideration given to the $15,000 he'd secretly withdrawn. He would be responsible for his own debts and his child support obligations to Amber. I would be entitled to spousal support for 18 months while I established financial independence. The document also included a clause about marital misconduct. His secret accounts, his separate household, his documented plans to abandon the marriage. All of it was outlined in legal language that made his betrayal undeniable. "This is one-sided," he said, his voice shaking. "No lawyer would agree to this." "Actually, your lawyer will strongly advise you to accept it," I replied. "Given the evidence of financial misconduct and the fact that you established a separate household while still married, these terms are quite fair." Blake sank back into his chair. The anger was draining from his face, replaced by dawning realization. "If you contest this," I continued, "everything becomes public. Your job will know. Your family will know. Amber will see exactly how you manipulated both of us. His face had gone pale again. I need to think about this. I need to talk to a lawyer. Of course. Take your time. But you're not staying here while you decide. Blake hired an attorney. A man named Vincent Russo who had a reputation for aggressive family law tactics. I wasn't worried. Brenda had anticipated this. A week after I'd given Blake the separation papers, I received a call from Brenda. Vincent Russo contacted me, she said. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. He reviewed your evidence. He told Blake the same thing I told you. These terms are actually generous considering what we could pursue. What did Blake say? He's devastated. Apparently, he didn't realize how much trouble he was in financially. Brenda explained that Blake's child support obligations to Amber would be calculated based on his income. Combined with the spousal support he'd owe me and the division of assets, he was looking at serious financial strain. He was counting on keeping access to your income and the house while also supporting Amber, Brenda said. He wanted both lives. Now he's realizing he can't afford either one the way he imagined. 2 days later, Blake showed up at the house. I watched him through the window as he sat in his car for several minutes, gathering courage. When he finally knocked, I considered not answering. But I opened the door. He stood there holding flowers. Grocery store tulips, my least favorite. His eyes were red. Can we talk? He asked, his voice shaky. I let him in, though every instinct screamed not to. We sat in the living room, maintaining distance. He set the flowers on the coffee table between us. I've been thinking a lot, he started, his rehearsed speech obvious. About us. About our marriage. About everything I'm throwing away. I said nothing. I made terrible mistakes, he continued. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have. But Vanessa, we have history. 7 years. That has to count for something. He leaned forward, trying to catch my eye. I know you're hurt. I know I destroyed your trust. But relationships can heal. People work through affairs all the time. We could go to counseling. We could rebuild. I watched him perform his apology, noting how his eyes kept darting to his phone. How his leg bounced nervously. I love you, he said, though the words sounded hollow. I never stopped loving you. This thing with Amber, it was a mistake, a stupid, selfish mistake. Then he slipped. His mask cracked for just a moment. And honestly, I need you right now. Financially, I mean. These support payments, the lawyers, everything. It's crushing me. If we could just stay together for a while, until I get stable. The truth finally emerged. He didn't want me back because he loved me. He wanted me back because he needed my income, my stability, my half of the bills. I stood up. You should go. Vanessa, please, go. He left, but the manipulation attempts continued. Text messages, emails, voicemails, all variations of the same theme. We could fix this if I'd just be reasonable. Then Amber reached out again. I ended things with Blake, her message read. I realized he lied to both of us. He's not the man I thought he was. I'm focusing on my son now. We don't need someone who can't be honest. She sent screenshots of recent arguments they'd had. Blake had been pressuring her to let him move into her apartment, claiming he couldn't afford his own place anymore. When she'd refused, he'd become angry, accusatory. He said you were taking everything from him, Amber wrote. That you were being vindictive and cruel. But I saw the separation papers. I saw what he did. You're just protecting yourself. Another message came. He keeps saying he needs help, just until he stabilizes. But I think this is who he is. Someone who uses people and then plays the victim when there are consequences. She was right. Blake was drowning now, overwhelmed by responsibilities he'd created, unable to maintain the double life he'd built. Blake asked to meet me at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. Public space. I agreed, though Brenda advised bringing my phone and recording the conversation if Washington state law allowed it. She checked. It did, as long as one party consented. I was that party. He arrived looking haggard. He'd lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled. The confident, charming man I'd married seemed to have aged years in weeks. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting across from me in a corner booth. "I wanted to talk face to face. To really try to work this out." For 30 minutes, he cycled through every manipulation tactic he had. Guilt. After everything we built together, you're just throwing it away? Nostalgia. Remember our first apartment? How happy we were. Tears. Actual tears running down his face as he talked about losing me. None of it moved me. I'd cried all my tears in a hospital parking lot. I'd mourned our marriage while he held flowers for another woman. "I can't keep living like this," he said finally, dropping the performance. "The support payments, the lawyers, the apartment I can't even afford anymore. I'm drowning, Vanessa." "That's not my problem," I said quietly. "But we're still married. We're still legally tied together." I pulled out my phone and showed him an email. "The final divorce paperwork was filed this morning. You have 30 days to contest it. Brenda says you won't." Blake didn't contest the divorce. Vincent Russo had apparently made it very clear that fighting would only cost more money and likely result in worse terms. The 30-day waiting period passed quietly. Blake moved out of the Riverside apartment he couldn't afford. According to Amber, who I'd stayed in occasional contact with, he'd moved in with his mother on the other side of town. His child support payments were being garnished directly from his paycheck now, along with the spousal support he owed me. Between those obligations and his legal fees, he was living on a fraction of his former income. He sent me an email 3 months after the divorce finalized. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," it began. "But I'm in a really difficult situation. The support payments are killing me. I can barely afford food and gas. I was wondering if you could help, just until I get back on my feet. Maybe reduce the spousal support or give me a loan." I deleted the email without responding. 2 weeks later, another message. "Please, Vanessa. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve your help. But I'm desperate. My mom's house is tiny. I'm sharing a bedroom with boxes of her old stuff. I can't even have my son visit because there's no room." I blocked his email address. 6 months after the hospital phone call that shattered my life, I signed the lease on a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom with good light and a view of the park. It was mine. Only mine. I'd taken up painting, something I'd loved in college but abandoned when life got busy. My apartment walls displayed my attempts, mostly abstract pieces in blues and greens. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. I started therapy to process the betrayal and rebuild my sense of self. Work promoted me to senior supervisor with a significant raise. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The constant anxiety that had marked those weeks after discovering Blake's betrayal began to fade. I stopped checking over my shoulder. I stopped waiting for the next manipulation. One afternoon, a large envelope arrived via certified mail. Inside was the final divorce decree. Official, stamped, permanent. Blake had signed without contesting a single term. Our marriage was legally over. I sat on my couch holding the papers, expecting to feel something dramatic. Relief. Sadness. Anger. Instead, I felt peace. Simple, quiet peace. The chaos was over. The lies were exposed. The truth had won. I'd chosen myself. And that choice had led me here, to this small apartment where I could finally start rebuilding my life on my own terms. A year after that devastating phone call, I visited my friend Hannah at St. Augustine Medical Center. She'd just had her second daughter, and I'd come to meet the baby and bring flowers. As I left the maternity ward, my arms full of get-well balloons Hannah's kids had insisted I take home, I passed the waiting area outside the delivery rooms. And there he was. Blake sat slumped in an uncomfortable plastic chair, holding a crying infant against his shoulder. He looked exhausted. His clothes were rumpled. His hair needed cutting. He was alone, no Amber in sight, just him and a baby who wouldn't stop wailing. He looked up as I walked by. Our eyes met. I saw recognition. Then shame. Then something that might have been regret or longing or loss. He opened his mouth like he might speak. I smiled politely, the way you might smile at a stranger, and kept walking. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. The balloons bobbed above my head as I headed toward the elevator. Behind me, the baby's cries echoed down the hallway. I didn't look back. I'd gotten everything I needed from that moment. Not revenge. Not satisfaction in his obvious struggle. Just confirmation that I'd made the right choice. He'd chosen his path. I'd chosen mine. And I was walking toward freedom while he sat trapped in consequences of his own making. That was justice enough.